I would say that probably at least 50% of our crime problem is a result of illegal immigration. You know, we heard about it with Trump saying, "Oh, Venezuela and the countries emptied their prisons and sent them to the United States," and the press just all said Trump's lying. And here we are now, 7 weeks into Trump's second presidential term, and those are all turning out to be true.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show.
All right, and with that, on to today's episode. Returning to the show, you know him, you love him, Ken Good. Welcome back to the Brian Nichols Show. How you been?
I'm great. Thank you, Brian. It's been a long time no see, but it's good to see you again.
Long time no see, and here we are both out of a hotel room. You're on your hotel room. I'm in my hotel room traveling. But you know what? We can't let a good conversation get missed due to travel. So we're making it work today. We're road warriors today, Ken.
Yeah, we travel is trying to get us down, but we're overcoming.
Yeah, the audience didn't get to see the behind the scenes of the headaches you and I both have had with technical issues getting logged in. But you know what? Gosh darn it, we're 15 minutes late, but we're going to have some fun today. I guarantee it.
That's right. Well, I was having a great time until you were saying you were going to take off your hat so we would both look old. I was really hoping you would say so just one of us would look old, and I would just assume which one you were talking about. But since you both look old, I'm kind of mad at the moment.
I guess you can't see the gray hair. I'll have no hair at all. Ken, but we'll leave the audience to decide who looks older for today's episode. Sound fair?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, all right, cool. Ken, it's great to have you back in the show. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I know last time we were talking about what to expect from a Trump presidency. Elephant in the room, Trump won. And now we get to actually see some outcomes. And outcomes are we ever seeing? I know right now we're seeing some very positive outcomes, especially when you look at the impact on immigration, the impact on a foreign policy standpoint, but also an impact in terms of how we're approaching criminal justice across the board right now. So I'm really excited to dig into that conversation. But before we do that, just do us a favor for the folks maybe who didn't get to check out your last appearance. Shame on you. Go check that out. In the meantime, and fill us in. Who are you, and why do you focus so much in this criminal justice world, specifically looking at bail bonds?
Well, my name is Ken Good. I am an attorney in Texas. I specialize in bail law. I know that sounds really exciting. There's people going, "Oh, I wish I could do that," but it's an area of the law that I've specialized in for probably 20 years now. I've truly loved it. And the issues. I grew up as an attorney. Liking appellate issues. And so, I was in a lot of competitions in law school. I argued a bunch of cases even early in my career. And so because of that background, when all of these issues with bail reform came up, I set about to become very knowledgeable on these. I just had an article published probably last Friday or a week ago Friday on a bail issue on Law 360. So it's an area that I enjoy, and it's an area that I write about a lot now. And so I try to, the reason why I became knowledgeable in this is because I found that if we didn't, or if we weren't, nobody else was telling our story, and the story that they were telling wasn't true. It wasn't close to reality. So we decided we had to become experts on this area so that the truth could come out.
Well, and this is one area we're talking about bail bonds that a lot of folks just aren't familiar with, candidly. It's not something that you don't get to see every single day, right? It's only in unique circumstances, which if you are a person in need of a conversation about bail bonds, good luck, because you're probably in a little red flags or hot water, whatever the expression is right then. Or it's something that impacts your family or something therein. So this is a conversation that a lot of folks really aren't familiarized with. It's just not something that people deal with every day. So just before we dig into the conversation as it pertains to having Trump in power today, just give us a little bit of a context of what the bail bond world looked like before Trump and why there is some very much some positivity now that he's in office.
Before Trump came into office, the criminal justice world and the bail world were under attack. And it wasn't under attack to make it better. It was under attack to make it more equitable, more diverse, more inclusive. And, we all know now that those are all code words for decriminalization. And so when we're trying to have more DEI in criminal justice, we're telling everybody to put up with more crime. And when we're telling everybody that we need to be more inclusive in the bail world, that means we need to release people without accountability. And so that's what's been happening as we've changed as different jurisdictions have tried these nouveau programs that have been pushed by these pseudoscience groups. They've been absolute failures. And the problem is nobody's going to acknowledge it. Here's a great example. I wrote an article in October of last year about why we should question the FBI statistics as not being accurate. 10 days later, the FBI came out and updated their statistics to show that crime was increasing. And suddenly, that's when I thought Trump has a good chance of winning, because I don't believe the FBI would be updating their statistics a month before the election to help Trump if they thought he was going to lose. And so that's when I became very positive about the election, because I thought that wouldn't be happening if they thought he was going to lose. And so now with Trump in office, there's a sea change. We're going back to what we know. You can see it on immigration, where they're like, we don't need a new law on immigration. We just need a new president. Same thing on law enforcement, criminal justice reform. We don't need reforms to make people feel safer. We just need to enforce the laws that we have. And we've discovered, shock of all shocks, that the bail industry does one thing. They do it very well. They get people to go to court, and there's not an alternative that gets anywhere close to them. And so we're actually seeing a resurgence of what we know works, and the bail industry, a resurgence of using them in the criminal justice world.
So I was listening to a podcast today over on Reason Magazine's network. It's a podcast called Just Asking Questions. And the podcast was talking with someone who worked in the criminal justice world. And this is a topic that they actually brought up themselves, is you look at a lot of this narrative that we heard from folks on the left was, just need to reform things, Ken. We just need to tinker with things. And I mean, how well put it was during the the address to Congress, the State of the Union light, we'll call it, right? Where Trump said, and you paraphrase, that we didn't need new policy, we needed a new president. So how much of this stuff that we're seeing right now, and specifically, looking at the world of bail bonds, but also just by and large the criminal justice conversation that's really taken over, especially since 2020, Ken, how much of that has been due to the fact that the law itself is broken versus we're just not enforcing said law?
I would say 98% of it that we're not enforcing the law. And every driving things, it's because of politics. Look at California. They decriminalized theft under $950. That was a result of Prop 47. The public was so upset about the way that was being handled that I think it was Prop 32 or 34 or something, but it was on the agenda, on the ballot in November, and it passed by 20 points to roll back Prop 47. So I think if the public, when Prop 47 originally passed, if the public had said, hey, we're going to vote on putting up with more crime or not, we know what the vote would have been. But they were told, oh, we'll be safer by doing these things. And so I think everything in California is taking place because they've capped their jail space or prison space, and they won't build additional prisons. So everything they do there is to decrease the number of people that go to prison because they're capped. And so it doesn't have anything to do with crime. It doesn't have anything to do with fighting crime. It has everything to do with, we're not going to build more space, so we're not going to put any more people in jail. So people have to put up crime. And that's what's going on. And when you look at it like that, you realize we know how to fight crime. We know how people to behave, and we're choosing not to do it. Choosing not to do it because of politics. And you can see that change with Trump's in 7 weeks. I mean, 7 weeks. It took 6 weeks to secure a border. Same thing on crime. I mean, if our Democrat friends are not careful, we're going to start having such a disparity between the rest of the country and our urban Democratic strongholds, and they're going to not have because of the demand safety. I mean, what they're forgetting, we've been through this cycle before in the 60s where we were feeling safe, black, or we were more forgiving of criminal laws. Crime started going up, and then we had a backlash on how to address it. We're having that exact same thing happen. What our Democrat friends are forgetting is that in our urban areas in the 60s, it was the pastors were the first to say we have to change. They saw what it was doing to their young black men, their minority men in their communities. Same thing's happening now. It's just now it's much worse because we have all this money. We have this money from advocacy groups from the left pushing even further to the left. And then we're finding out now about all this US aid money that's being used to, essentially buy off people so that they won't oppose these policies. And now that all that's going to go away, the backlash is going to be even more powerful and stronger than it would have been because it's been depressed for long.
Well, and this is where the narrative from folks on the right really was getting ignored over the past, we'll say few decades, but really over the past 4 years, especially because we watched firsthand while the government argued on one side, we can arbitrarily shut down all of society because of a scary virus. But on the same side, we can't quell these riots that are taking place across the country in the argument of criminal justice. And oh, by the way, if you do happen to go to one of these protests or one of these riots, don't worry, COVID, the big scary boogeyman of the time, it won't hurt you because you're out there fighting for social justice. And I think that was the moment, Ken, that a lot of folks woke up on the right. But you fast forward to the election here in 2024 that we just all experienced, and that narrative really got tested when you have folks like Kamala Harris who would look at the American public, and I'm not going to just say lie. Like it was gaslighting, it was lying, it was bending over backwards to hide from the truth. And you see when people would ask her, Kamala, you were on the debate stage in 2020 versus Joe Biden, saying all of these quite radical leftist progressive talking points. And then fast forward just 4 short years, and suddenly you, the sitting vice president behind Joe Biden, has had a complete change of heart, a 180 from your past positions, and you cannot articulate why that is. And that is, I think, when the rest of America, at least the folks who have some common sense left, also woke up and said, okay, enough is enough. It's time to start doing some stuff differently. So let's talk about that right there, Ken. What is the stuff that we are seeing being done differently, specifically looking at how the Trump administration and the Trump DOJ is approaching bail bond issues and criminal justice across the board?
Well, let me start with saying, when this became a really clear issue to me is in the criminal justice world, these same people would argue we should not hold 21, 22, 23, 24-year-old people accountable because their brain is not fully developed till they're 25. But at the same time, these same people are arguing that we should let young children who are minors make decisions about their bodies that's going to be life-changing and cannot ever be stopped. And then if you've never seen these same groups try to justify these two positions by arguing their different parts of the brains, you've not lived, and you go, you're just completely bonkers. You've sold your soul to the devil. And I mean the devil, you sold your soul to these advocacy groups, because these advocacy groups like to argue that all these policies will not increase crime when even common sense says they will. So what has Trump done to this? First of all, he's put a big spotlight on the issue, and he's stressed the importance of fighting, and he's also talked about going back to what we know. And I've already said this, but the immigration is the biggest thing. He's been in office for 7 weeks. He's secured the border in 6 weeks. And he's shown the world that we don't need new statutes. We just need to do what we already know, enforce the laws that we already have. And you can see he's starting to do that. I mean, out yesterday, we had this whole awful fight with him deporting gang members of a Venezuelan gang. And now the news today is there's a constitutional crisis because Trump didn't turn a plane around when a judge told him to jump. And, I don't want to get into the legal arguments about whether, Trump, but look at the picture. I've always been thought of it as, when we have a city, we have probably about, a small group, living within that city that's committing 70-60% of the crimes. So we've got a city within the city of criminals. And then between those two, you've got this gray area where people are deciding, today, am I going to follow the law or am I going to follow the criminals because they're getting away with it? What the sea change is that Trump is sending a very strong message to that gray area, which is very large. And they're telling them, if you follow the criminals, you're going to be held accountable. And they're seeing it and they're going, I'm changing what I'm doing. I'm not going to go down that path. And that's just invaluable.
So, Ken, we've mentioned immigration here a few times. And I guess just for the audience who they're maybe not aware, or they're not in an area where they're heavily impacted by immigration, just paint the picture for us. How much has the illegal immigration conversation, specifically over the past 10 years, played into the issues that we're facing from a criminal justice standpoint?
Let's be honest. There's been a whole lot of chaos lately. Politicians playing games, crime running wild, common sense out the window. It's enough to make your blood pressure spike just turning on the evening news. But while the world's losing its mind, there is one thing you still can take control of: your heart health. And that's why I've been using Cardio Miracle every single day for the past 2 years. It's a nitric oxide supplement designed to support your heart, boost circulation, lower inflammation, and help you feel like the best version of yourself without needing a law degree to figure out what's in it. Because let's face it, whether it's your city or your cardiovascular system, things run better when the right stuff is enforced. And Cardio Miracle enforces what your body actually needs to stay strong and resilient. So don't wait for Congress to pass a bill. Scan that QR code over my shoulder or head to cardiomiracle.com. And be sure to use code TBNS at checkout for 15% off your order. Cardio Miracle, because your heart deserves law and order too. And now, let's get back to the show.
I would say that probably at least 50% of our crime problem is a result of illegal immigration. You know, we heard about it with Trump saying, "Oh, Venezuela and the countries emptied their prisons and sent them to the United States," and the press just all said Trump's lying. And here we are now, 7 weeks into Trump's second presidential term, and those are all turning out to be true. I mean, can you imagine where countries can just empty all of their prisons into the United States? And I'll tell you how bad it got with Biden. I posted a story onto my Facebook page during the election, but not at the end. And it was about how cartels were not laundering their money in the United States. They were moving their operations into the United States. And they're doing it in areas where, California is as marijuana. So they're moving their whole operations into California because they've decriminalized it, but they're also, because of open borders, they can bring everybody they need to work for them, and they'll go into some national park and they'll take it over. Well, when I posted that story, it immediately got deleted. And I'm like, is this story being suppressed? Surely not. So I posted again, immediately got deleted. Wow. Never heard one thing about it until Trump, a few months later in the presidential election, started talking about it. And now with the election of Trump, not only have I been able to post that story, I've been able to do a podcast about it. So, I mean, I just didn't believe there was any suppression going on now in 2024, but I believe there was. I mean, that's the reason why I think the backlash will be so much bigger and worse for the Democrats if they're not careful, because they were intentionally suppressing news that would have stopped them from doing what they were doing at the time.
Yeah, well, and this right here, I think you just hit on something that it really does speak to how important it has been to watch folks like Elon Musk put, his reputation and, his income, his salary, or his treasure, I guess, in this case, on the line, buying Twitter for $44 billion just to be able to make sure there was a platform where folks were able to openly speak their mind, but also to talk about these very real issues that were being not just ignored, but to your point, censored by the corporate media. And, I'm genuinely curious, Ken, to see the outcome here of now more and more folks not just being able to communicate freely, but now the stuff that your average person wasn't able to see Now they're seeing it. And in the world of sales, the folks who've heard me do my sales coaching, I always teach help people see things that they can't unsee, right? And it's at the point now where your average person has seen so much. They've seen the millions of dollars, as you mentioned, going to all these random nonprofits from USAID that, I mean, let's just be real here. It looks like nothing more than a glorified Ponzi scheme or money laundering operation at this point. But then you factor in, the fact that we had thousands of illegals crossing the border daily, and that number has just dropped off the cliff. And to see that all it took was people starting to stand up and say no. And it's not been easy for folks on the more, I'll say, common sense side of things to stand up and speak to the common sense, because I think, Ken, and I would love to hear your perspective here. We had this very strong progressive culture, this leftist culture that was permeating all the institutions. You would turn on your evening news, and chances are that it was bought to and paid for by some progressive mentality or mindset. You go to your colleges, your universities, same thing. Your kids' schooling, same thing. You go to the workplace, HR departments, same thing. Hollywood, the entertainment industry, same thing. So we have this continuation of this leftist narrative that your average person, that's all they heard. So if that's all you hear, that becomes your world, right? That becomes the status quo normalcy. Whereas the folks who were like, listen, I'm not a radical extremist. I'm just a normal dude from 20 years ago. Those people started to speak out more. And then once the floodgates opened, Ken, it was over. It was party over. So I'm genuinely curious. Do you think that going into 2026 and 2028, that we're going to see even more of a swing back towards, I'll say, more moderate on the left, but even from a conservative, libertarian, Republican standpoint, even more of a swing back towards some of the traditional, we'll say right-wing solutions that seem to, by and large, resonate with a large base of Americans just because they are rooted in common sense?
I'm very, very optimistic that that's going to happen. But let me tell you something. When Trump was in his first term of office, I think probably the best description I saw of him was that he was doing something he wasn't comfortable doing. That was pretending to be a politician. And, his mouth, and he said things that were very non-politician like. I mean, when I voted for him the second time, I was like, I wish he didn't say some of the things he said. But the problem is, Trump is a very intelligent man. He's probably one of the smartest people we've ever had president. And now he's prepared. And now, I mean, the best comment I've heard about Trump during his second term is now he's doing what he knows best. He is putting back together a bankrupt company. And I really think that that's true. Now, the thing that makes me a little bit nervous is there's only been one other president in our history that had two non-consecutive terms, which is Grover Cleveland. And Grover Cleveland left office his second term very not liked, or he was not liked. So his poll numbers at the end of his second term were very low. So I'm concerned about that. But I think that Trump has the potential to be one of the most consequential presidents we've ever had. I think that if he continues down the path he is, and if the Democrats continue down the path they are, because I think it's going to take another election for the Democrats to moderate. You can see in their national committee elections they just had that they were essentially saying we weren't liberal enough. If we did, or if Harris had not moderated, we would have won. And I think that's a mistake. That's the wrong conclusion to draw. The United States is a center-right country at the very least, and they've been running in name only as center-left. They've been running it from far left, and that's the reason why we've had the backlash we've had. It's going to be even worse, like I've said, because they've pushed it, they've covered it up, they've forced it, and they've threatened people to keep them quiet for a while. And that only works for so long. And then when the truth comes out, there's a lot more anger. So I think if I was to weigh and guess and say, what do I think for a year or two from now? I think that the depending on the midterm elections, if the Republicans hold the House, Katie bar the door, the Democrats may be done for a decade on national elections.
So, Ken, with the around 7 minutes we have left here for the show, I would love for you to paint the picture to the audience of best case scenarios, right? Let's say Trump and the Trump team continue forward here. We're making some headway in terms of some common sense reforms, specifically from a criminal justice bail bonds perspective. Paint the picture of not just the best outcomes, but also looking from a strategy standpoint to make sure that we don't go into this realm of insanity again. What are some things that we can see from a policy prescription to keep us in check, but also to keep us moving on this right path forward?
Well, I think one of the things that we can do is Trump can use his bully pulpit. He can say, highlight what works and what doesn't. But the best thing he's done is focus the FBI again on crime instead of politics. I mean, I would say the Biden administration spent a lot of time fighting political opponents and not crime, and looking the other way on crime, if you want to argue that Biden knew what was going on. I think the best case scenario going forward is that Trump sends a strong message to the colleges that if you're going to sacrifice public safety in the name of public speech, but it really isn't First Amendment speech. It's all about intimidation for a select few. If that's what you're going to do, you're going to lose all kinds of funding. And I think they will jump in line because they'll follow the money. And I think that will happen relatively quickly. I mean, I expect that to be done in the next year. I think from the law enforcement standpoint, you're going to see probably less from Trump, but more from red states as they get a hold of crime. And you see where blue urban areas continue to have problems. And where you're going to see it is crime going up, crime staying the same, but you're going to see it in commercial property values. When commercial property values drop and the properties are selling for 25 cents on the dollar, 30 cents on the dollar from what they were selling 3 or 4 years ago, that's a recipe for disaster. And those urban areas are not going to be able to go to Washington, D.C. and ask for a bailout. Trump's not going to do it because he's going to say, this is your own fault. So I think best case scenario is you're going to see such a disparity between the urban areas and the rest of the country that they're going to be pressured by their citizens to fall in line. And so I'm very hopeful that that happens, because I've always said the reason why I'm hopeful that criminal justice reform will change course is what we were doing right then was not sustainable. And I think it's been proven to be true. It wasn't sustainable. And now everybody's changing course and going back to law and order. And I would say the biggest problem we have is, who do you listen to on crime stats? I mean, we've got all these advocacy groups that just have all this money, and probably part of it was from USA, and so that's gone. So that will change. But they just do these pseudoscience reports saying crime is going down. That's absolutely a lie. And so it's, who do you believe? And I would say historically, law enforcement has been the go-to place for statistics on crime, and we have to tell the public, if you want to know what to believe on crime, you need to go back to law enforcement. And, the biggest problem we've had is these pseudoscience groups are saying, don't believe them, they're law enforcement. Well, now we're entering a period is believe them, they're law enforcement. And I think that's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years.
Ken, is there any concern of, for every yin, a yang, right? Do you see any potential negatives here to move forward, where what we're seeing from a positive common sense standpoint today might incentivize people down the road to start flipping policy the opposite way, flip the car right back into reverse to where we came from?
Well, I do see some risk, and that is, when the pendulum goes too far to the left, you have too much crime. I mean, crime starts going up. And the public's not going to stand for that. But when you see the pendulum sweep too far to the right, then I think what we're seeing right now is the argument, we need to hold more people pretrial detention, we need to hold more people in jail and not let them out. And I think the problem with that as well is the public's not going to pay for that. So we have to find a happy medium. That's what keeps the pendulum from swinging too far to the left, too far to the right. If we had kept the the filibuster in the United States Congress, that would moderate people because they have to find compromise. But once we got rid of that on a bunch of issues, that's one of the reasons why we have these pendulums swinging. And so when the pendulum goes too far to the left, it's going to also swing very hard to the right. And that's where we are right now. But I'm very hopeful. I'm hopeful that the people who are making policies currently are making them with good intentions. One of the reasons why Biden was so at risk during his presidency to litigation was because he was making bad decisions and he was doing things that he could not do. And he even admitted it earlier that he couldn't do it, but he couldn't get the Congress to do it, so he did it anyway. That's not what Trump is doing with executive orders. He's doing it based upon a statute, like the one he just did to get rid of the terrorists. It was based on a statute that allowed him to do this. Now, they can argue that it hadn't been invoked since World War II, but it's still a statute on the books that he can invoke and do exactly what he's doing. That's a big difference. And so as a result, I don't think the Democrats are going to have near the success in litigation. Eventually, they're having great success on TROs, but that's because TROs are not appealable. Once they get to the preliminary injunction, the initial TRO has been so watered down, and Trump still will win, most likely. But that's not about winning; that's about slowing him down. So I think the other than the risk of over detention for people in red states, I think we're on a good track.
Yeah, comparing and contrasting Trump's administration with Biden's administration, it looks like a lot of the stuff that the Biden administration did was more not from the stroke of a pen, but the stroke of an auto pen. But that may be a different conversation for a different day. Ken Good, always a pleasure talking to you. Where can folks go ahead, continue the conversation, learn more about criminal justice, bail bonds, and all that fun stuff and more?
Well, if people want more information about me or my group, you can go to pbtx.com. The Professional Bondsmen of Texas. We have a blog where we highlight important criminal justice stories, but we also have our own podcast where all we talk about is criminal justice. There's a link on our menu, but you can also go to thebellpost.com and you can see this is our 4th season right now.
There you go. Good stuff. Well, Ken, keep up the great work. It's always a pleasure having a great conversation. And by the way, folks, this is showing that the Brian Nichols Show, as well as Ken Good, we will do a show regardless of where life takes us or whatever hotel rooms we end up in. But Ken, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show again. And folks, if you got some value from today's episode, you know the drill. Go ahead, give it a share. When you do, please tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and over on Instagram. And by the way, for the Brian Nichols Show, you can find us on your favorite podcast platforms as well as video platforms for podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, wherever it is you get your podcast content. And for videos, head over to YouTube, head over to Rumble, Twitter, or I guess now X, or Facebook, which, by the way, we are live streaming all episodes over on Facebook, X, and Rumble when they air Mondays and Friday evenings at 8:30 p.m. EST. There we go. So make sure you set your calendar. We'll have those new episodes air every Monday and Friday evenings. And other than that, go ahead, shoot me any of your questions, your comments at brian@briannicholsshow.com. And of course, thank you for commenting on and sharing today's video. With that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Ken Good. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.